strategy expert who helps organizations turn regulation into resilience. And in this keynote, don't make NIS2 your Y2K. Marcel draws a parallel between something that the youngsters not remember, but we do, the fear of the famous year 2000. It turned out that the panic was not necessary, but we had preparations in anticipation. And by drawing a parallel to the current digital landscape, he wants to highlight why the NIS2 directive is equally critical. You'll gain a clear understanding of what it is, the potential consequences if you ignore it, and why proactive implementation is crucial. So please join me on stage, Marcel Lücht.
Thank you very much. Who in this audience remembers Y2K? Ooh, dangerous. Because it says something about your age. Okay, I will briefly talk a little bit about Y2K, and it will be an interesting story. I hope at least it will be interesting. I will tell then something about NIS2. Anybody here knows about NIS2? 1, 2, 2.5, okay. I will explain what it is, don't worry. And I will also quickly talk a little bit about quantum. And quantum was already mentioned by Erwin here, because 2025 is the year of quantum. Okay, a little bit about my company, Kazama Consulting, and myself. We basically do two things, interim management, so that's strategy and execution and bid management. And we also do market research and yeah, this type of activities. Why? Because market research also helps a lot in strategy and finding out, yeah, giving the right advice. Okay, today, on this day, the 14th of October 2024, there was a famous breach at Cisco. Not many people remember it, but it is, I know this is a communication and marketing fair partially. It was also quite famous because Cisco didn't really respond in the way they were supposed to, and under NIS2 law it would have basically caused a bit of issues. Because on the 14th of October 2024 it was on the dark web announced that somebody had gained access to the databases and source code of Cisco. And 4 gigabytes of data was captured. Cisco, of course, classically, as most people do, denied everything, said, no, nothing has been breached, everything is in order. But a few weeks later, they had to actually say, like, okay, yeah, we did have a breach and our data was stolen. So I already will prepare you a little bit towards NIS2. Don't make that same mistake as Cisco did a year ago exactly. Okay, now a story about tea, Mormons and bugs. 1949, so that's already quite some time ago. J. Lyons, anybody knows J. Lyons? No? Anybody know Starbucks? Exactly. Well, J. Lyons was in 1949 in the UK the Starbucks of today. Only not, of course, with coffee, but with tea, because we're in England after all. So they had a very successful chain of tea rooms where you could buy tea, cakes, and all sorts of assorted food stuff. And it was very successful. So successful that in 1949, the comptroller, John Simmons, decided to hire Pinkerton, who was from the University of Cambridge, to develop a business computer. Actually, the very first business computer of its time. Why? That way, all the administration that happens in a tea room, ordering what stock needs to be replenished, etc., to the central warehouse, it was all automated. That was his vision, his idea. We already talked about vision today. Well, this is really a vision that he had. So Pinkerton started working. And in 1951, Leo 1, which stood for Alliance Enterprise Office, number 1, started operating. So that was only 2 years later. The first computer was basically built. And it was so successful that in 1954, it was actually already working at mass capacity. It was totally full of working on a daily basis, and there was no capacity left anymore. Storage became an issue at that time. 1960, anybody has any idea what the price, the cost of storage was in a data center? No? $175 per megabyte, not gigabyte, not terabyte, megabyte per month. You say, okay, $175, it's not that much. In today's money, $25,000 per megabyte per month. Okay, it's serious money. So everybody in IT, in automation at that point was starting to see how can we reduce the amount of storage that we need. And what did they invent? You know, let's make things shorter than what you would expect it to be. See how that works. So 1922 became 22. 1954 became 54, because hey, why would you need a 19? Everything is right now, right? Okay. That was the mistake that people at that point, the choice that people at that point made, which ended up being a mistake. Okay, Robert Beamer, it's a very funny story as well. Robert Beamer started in 1955 as head programmer at IBM. And Bob Beamer was a very peculiar person, because he kept notes of literally everything. In fact, in 2001, he was interviewed in his mountain cabin, and it was literally packed with lists of every note, every phone call that he made. He had noted it down, and there were piles and piles and piles of paper. That's the kind of person that he was. And Bob Beamer noticed that actually he was the first one to alert that the storage, the notation of two figures only for a year would cause a problem in the future. Why? Because he had, through IBM, gotten the assignment of the Mormons to digitize their genealogical files. Now, anybody who knows a little bit about genealogy knows that the Mormons in Salt Lake City have a huge amount of data on all birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates of all over the world. And it was all stored in big boxes somewhere in Salt Lake City. And they wanted that digitized. Right now, you can go online in the Mormon church and you can look for information for your ancestors. At that time, it was on paper, you needed to travel there. And he noticed, like, okay, we've got a problem here if we're going to use the two-digit system for the years. Because, genealogy, it goes back to 1800, 1700, even to 1600 something. So if 52, what 52? 1952? 1752? It became a problem. He alerted it, but nobody really listened. In 1980, the first real business applications started to suffer from this bug because brokerage firms started issuing bonds, again in the UK and in America, and those bonds, they have particularly like 20 years of validity date. So when they needed to note the validity date of a bond, which was issued in 2000 or in 1981, it would expire in 2001. Okay, wait, 01? 1901, 2001, problem. So then the business world itself started seeing, okay, it's a problem. In 1993, Peter de Jager, a South African IT computer expert, wrote a first article in Computer World which predicted doomsday. That was really the wake-up call for the rest of the world on the Y2K problem. In 1999, so a lot of people started working at that point. In 1999, it is a very interesting story. There were 20 military from Russia, Russian military, well, USSR at that point. They were landing in an airbase in America. You would say, like, okay, Russians in America? Imagine the Cold War was not yet really fully over, more or less like today. So they landed at Peterson's Air Base in Colorado. Why? Because everybody had been working on Y2K, but the Russians were not sure that their systems were able to deal with Y2K, the bug that in 2000 not all the computers would crash or go crazy. So they wanted to have somebody there at the airbase who could actually call the president if the Russian systems would say like, hey, everything is going berserk and missiles are being launched, to ensure that they could call the president with the red phone we all know from the movies and say like, no, 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 don't worry, we are here, nothing is happening, everything is okay. That is how tense and how stressed the worlds were about Y2K. Okay, now, 1st of January 2000 came, and there were a few issues only. The Deutsche Oper, the salary payments didn't go well, and the Deutsche Bank, they accidentally made a transfer of a wire of 12 million Deutschmark, which they shouldn't have done. But those were actually the only things that happened. So you would say like, okay, it was, you know, a fuzz, as we say. There was not really any problem with Y2K. Everybody was stressed for nothing. But is that really the case? Because we have looked at what the cost actually of Y2K ended up being. Gartner predicted that Y2K would cost up to 100 billion euros. And later on, Reuters did the math, and turned out $308 billion was the cost for preparation of Y2K, to avoid Y2K from happening. So that was the cost. So it was absolutely not nothing. There went a lot of preparation in it. Okay, now to NIS2. NIS2 stands for Network Information Systems Directive. It is basically the law that the EU have issued in order to prepare the EU organizations for cybersecurity and for resilience. That is NIS2. The first one was published in 2016. It came in effect in 2018. And it covered energy, healthcare, drinking water, public transport, and digital providers and banking. Now, those were considered essential, and they were supposed to have their, excusez le mot, shit in order. They were all alerted. So they got mail, they got calls from the agencies saying like, you are on our list, you have to be sure that you're prepared. Now, we all know that right now we live in a hyper-connected world, and digital is everything. I mean, this is basically the whole name of this conference, Digital First. Without digital means we don't exist anymore. So the EU decided to issue NIS2, which is a big difference from NIS1. And it came in effect in 2022. It was written, published, and it came in effect October last year. Now, we have a lot more sectors which are suddenly implied by NIS2. Wastewater, public administration, space, ICT management, manufacturing, postal service, etc. You can see the whole list on screen. They're all impacted by the NIS2 directive. Now, what are the changes between NIS1 and NIS2? No more active identification, I already mentioned that. You have to yourself ensure that you are not or should be complying by NIS2. Nobody's going to alert you, it's your responsibility. There are more impacted organizations, we already saw that in the list. So any organization might be impacted, but also the size is a lot smaller. A lot of people think NIS2 doesn't apply to me because NIS2 is only for big corporations which really are essential to the society. No. Actually, 50 people or 10 million turnover is the threshold. Trust me, there are a lot of companies who have 10, 11, 12 million threshold or more than 50 people on the payroll. You are potentially impacted, by NIS2. Also, reporting times are a lot shorter. If you have NIS2, if you have a breach, you should report within 24 hours to the government. And within 72 hours, they expect the first reports. So trust me, if you are not prepared, if you don't have everything in order, you will not be able to meet those deadlines. So there is definitely an impact that every of those companies have. Training of personnel is mandatory, so everybody should be trained on cybersecurity. And there are high fines. 2% of your worldwide turnover is the maximum fine that can be levied. Now, trust me, if you're a Coca-Cola, 2% of your worldwide turnover is a hefty amount of money. You don't want to lose that. So the idea is invest in proper measures. And very important, the C-levels of all those companies, they have personal liability. So if you get warned and you don't have things in order, and you think like, it's okay, I don't have time for that, I don't have money for that, you are personally liable. That is not something that any cybersecurity policy from an insurance firm can cover. You can be personally made liable. So educate those people. Now, we have done some research about the readiness of NIS2 in Belgium, and we found out, that was last year, that none of the companies were ready for NIS2. All of the companies who were all falling under the NIS2 law and directive, they said either it will take 6 months or a year, or they were not even sure when they were going to be ready. The budgets is also something that every time came back in the research we did. Most people said we don't have enough budgets, or we don't even know if we have sufficient budgets. Okay, so minimum requirements. I will not go through all of the minimum requirements which are here for NIS2 because it's quite boring, but there are 2 things which I would like to point out. First of all, business continuity, crisis management and supply chain security, and cryptography and encryption. Those are 2 things I will quickly touch upon. First of all, who knows what the CIA principle in information security is? Not the Central Intelligence Agency. The C stands for confidentiality, so all data that is supposed to be confidential and not made public should stay confidential. That's the confidentiality clause. I stands for integrity, so the data should not be altered. The data should remain the data it is. So if your date of birth is the 1st of June 2022, it should not suddenly become the 15th of June. And availability, and that is something a lot of people forget. Cybersecurity is not just about a data breach, it's about data availability as well. Who remembers the big electricity outage in Spain? Yeah? Technically, that was a cybersecurity incident because at that point, data was no longer available. That is also covered by NIS2. So redundancy is something that you should also bear in mind when preparing for NIS2. Now, redundancy. We all know this guy, Trump. He already said he's threatening retaliation against EU over fines over Google. You said, okay. This was Friday. Friday on True Social, he stated, he started ranting, and he had a few interesting lines there, and one of them is this one. Also on November 1st, we will impose export controls on any and all critical software. Now, who here knows what critical software comes from the US? Literally, we are here in digital agencies. You work on AWS, on Azure, on Office. If Trump decides that's critical software, you could have a problem. So also bear that in mind when you talk about availability and when you talk about crisis management of yourself, your own organization, if something gets turned off. Do you have a plan B? Then supply chain. Does anybody remember NotPetya into 2017? Does it ring a bell for anyone? No? NotPetya was actually the Russians who infiltrated an accounting firm in Ukraine to try to kill Ukrainian economy. So this Ukrainian war is not from 2022. It already in 2017 there was digital warfare going on. And it impacted a lot of companies, but not just in the Ukraine, but also in the West. Maersk, maybe you remember that Maersk had a lot of problems. The big shipping container, all the containers were stuck because their systems were bankrupt, didn't work anymore. It was all compromised. And a lot of other companies at that point also suffered because of a supply chain of attack. So one of the providers of software components got compromised, that got distributed all over the world, and everybody was suffering. So you can have your security in order, but if one of your digital suppliers doesn't have its shit in order, you could also be impacted. And that is why NIS2 also impacts smaller companies who are not even formally part of the NIS2 directive, Because if you supply something to companies who fall under the NIS2 directive, you automatically will be impacted. And as of today, I even have this issue in one of the clients I work with. We have to, for very small companies, ensure that they are NIS2 compliant, because that's what the organization I work for demands. Okay, quickly something about encryption, which is one part of the digital infrastructure. It's very important to encrypt your data to ensure that nobody has access to it. And we did a research amongst organizations in Belgium, and a lot of organizations are unable to, or they're not encrypting their data fully. Around 37% of the data is encrypted. The rest is only partially encrypted or not encrypted at all. So that's something, a very quick thing to think of. So take away, a lot of organizations do not yet fully encrypt their data. Now, I will not go too far about data in transit transcription, because that's, I think, for this audience too technical. But that is something where a lot of companies are still making a lot of mistakes. They are not encrypting their data in transit. So you have connectivity. They think they do it on application level, but it's so slow that you have a lot of problems in reality. Okay, but let's assume you are encrypting. You're safe, right? Now go back again to the previous speaker, because we're in the year of quantum. The post-quantum angle. Just some headlines from the news. Quantum computing, it is everywhere, and big steps are being made on a daily basis. Now, what does that mean for me as an organization with my data? I have data which is encrypted now, but will it still be encrypted in X years? Because quantum computers, they can do one thing very good, and that is breaking encryption. In fact, we had in last year a Chinese company stating that they already broke defense encryption. Well, there was a caveat. It was only 50 ciphers long instead of 256, but they did manage to break a 50 cipher encryption key, which was defense type. Of course, in length it was too short, but... Now Q-Day. Q-Day is the date on which it is predicted that quantum computing will be able to break RSA 2048 encryption. Now that is really state-of-the-art good encryption for most companies. If you have that right now, people say like, okay, you're safe. This is when a lot of research agencies think that Q-Day will appear. And you can see some of them think it will be maybe 2040, 2045. But more and more organizations think that actually Q-Day, so the fact that a quantum computer will be able to break most common encryption protocols, will already be within 5 years. So think, the data which you have now, is it safe, really? Does anybody know the SDNL principle? Store now, decrypt later. Exactly. So every data which you have now, if it is captured and it is still valuable somehow in 5 years, it is at risk, even today. Do you want your medical records to be publicized in 5 years? Or your chat history, or intellectual property? That is why in the previous slide, pharma companies were all right now, because they are heavy on intellectual property and on research data, all that data is at risk. If it is right now captured, in 5 years it can be decrypted and all that information becomes public domain. So as Q-Day approaches, more and more data sets will become compromised, potentially compromised. Now, awareness is lacking. I notice in the discussions I have with C-levels that often they are not aware of all the risks that they have, but they are liable. Don't forget, in NIS2, you have a personal liability if you don't have your IT security in order. Now, Y2K was a technical challenge, but NIS2 is only regulation, right? No, because a data breach will cost you, on average, 4.4 million. And trust me, it can go way higher than that. The cost of fines on top, 2%. And can anybody, we are here in the marketing group, can anybody tell me what the cost of your brand value is if you are on the front page of the Tijd and that you have been breached and your data has been made publicly, and then you make a communication mistake about, yeah, no, it didn't happen, and 2 weeks later, yeah, it did happen? Trust me, all the brand awareness, all the brand value you have created is at that point down the drain. So that is why NIS2 is very, very important for every organization, and I ensure you please do something about it in your organization. And then the last slide, indeed, for the books. So QR codes. Yeah, I am not a fan of them because there's a security risk, but in this case it's safe. You can scan.
Thank you so much, Marcel. I hope you enjoyed it. I learned something, and I'm not very technical, so there we go. This was it. This was our Speakers Base main stage for today. I want to thank all of the speakers. I want to thank Florence and Anya for curating this so carefully. They are really amazing. So if you feel that you want to learn more, go to speakersbase.com and find out what else there is. So thank you very much. My name was Doreen Leijers, and I hope to see you again one day. Thank you. Ja, dat is een goeie. Maar die data veranderen niet. Ja, dat is waar. En ik heb een mooie geboortedatum, dus die ga ik zeker ook niet veranderen.